Thank you, Balokas. Good morning, everyone. My name is Erik Green. I come from Green-Jakobsen, a maritime human performance consultancy company based in Denmark, but also we are in the Philippines, in Greece, and in Germany. What I'm going to be talking about today is human performance in general, and I'm going to be trying to combine data with conceptual ideas, because quite often when we discuss human performance, it tends up to be talking about, you could say, overall principles, virtues, etc. But how do we combine it with data so we can learn from it and actually use it in a performance perspective? Okay, so talking about data, where does our data come from when we're talking Green-Jakobsen? First of all, we have 50,000 what we call safety delta respondents. That means that we have 50,000 seafarers who, over a period of not 8 years for this reason, but for the last 6 years, have been giving us data. And the thing about this data is that it's not just a sample, it's a population we follow over time, so we can actually see developments when we're talking about this population. We also do a lot of seafarer interviews, we do office staff interviews, and we also do a lot of human performance surveys. So we feel that we have actually a lot of data to communicate here. Now, before I go into the data discussion and trying to make, you could say, a comparison to it, let's try and remind ourselves the way we view performance and how we go about it. And in a very simplified manner, I've tried to describe it here. Because very often when I come and visit clients, I often get the feeling that the perception of people is, over time, people just get more clever. Because they become more experienced, they have more courses, they've learned their lessons. So the general idea is that over time, we just become more clever. But the thing is, it probably goes more like this when we look at it, because different things happen as we go along. Now, let me give you an example. If you look at this one up here, new colleagues. Only 2 weeks ago, I read research from the medical fair, and talking about surgeons. Now, when you are a surgeon doing operations, this research showed that if you practice, you become better. That is not a surprise. So the more times you do things, you actually become more clever. So that's not the big surprise. But the surprise came that it's not just a question of volume of, when we're talking volume of operations, it's also about who you work with. Now, this research showed that the mortality rate among surgeons when they were new and inexperienced was 1%. So basically, 1% of the patients, they would die if they were operated by the surgeons. Over time, when they did it many times, it went down to 0.25. But the thing was, when these surgeons moved to different hospitals, private hospitals with new teams, the mortality rate went straight back to 1. So we just think about it in the maritime industry and say if humans are alike across industries, every single time we change a team, a crew, in principle, we are back to square. And that is an extremely important thing to remember when we're talking human performance, because it doesn't just go up like a straight line, it actually changes all the time because context decides to what degree people are clever. Now, so we could also say it another way, what we have, fine, experience, all the things we've learned, etc. But what we need is to deal with reality as it evolves for us. So we have experience with us, but we are experiencing. And what are we experiencing? That's the most important thing here. So when we talk about performance, it's always context dependent. And think of the surgeons again, new team, and then the mortality rate goes up. And we need to remember that. And also another thing we need to remember is that it's not always the fault of the individual. We tend to focus on the individual, we test them, we talk to them, we do all sorts of things to control their background, etc., etc. But what happens when they go on board the vessel and they don't work very well with the team on board? My own mother-in-law was a surgery nurse, so she stood there for 40 years helping doctors doing surgery. And I've spoken with her many times, and she says, listen, Erik, every single time a new surgeon came in, there were new problems. He wanted to do it this way, that way, etc. We didn't agree on different things, and we stood there in the room. Everyone was experienced, but it went up and down. The same thing goes for any other human when they're working with their professions. So, another way to see it is we also need to distinguish between three levels in my world: individual, team, and organizational performance. In this industry, when we talk about human performance, we tend to focus on the individual. Good, wonderful, we train, we test, we check, we talk to them, we take references. All this is really good, we need to keep on doing it. But as soon as they hit the gangway, all this, in principle, is challenged, because what happens if they don't like the people they're working with when they go on board the vessel? So we need to understand, if we want to talk about human performance, we also need to look at it from a team and an organizational perspective, not just testing that the individual has the certificates and the courses they need. Now, talking about how we could go about this, and that's the point of my presentation here. How can we go about it? Well, we can try and look at it when we're talking about human performance from two different parameters. The crew's, or the human's, ability to actually review their task. Talking about the surgeons again, to what degree are they capable of discussing their job? And you could say, to what degree do they like each other? So what we're talking about here is that we have two parameters in place. We have a focus on how well we do the job, but we also need to have a focus on how much we like each other. If you don't care about your colleagues, if you don't care about your job, you will have what you call a dysfunctional team. In other words, it will dissolve, people will be really ineffective. If you have a team where people don't care about each other and only care about the job, you will have a cold team. And if you have a team who don't care about the job and just care about how people are feeling, you will have a cozy, laid-back team. What we're looking for is a high-performing team where we actually try to have a focus on how well we are with each other and also how well we did the job. We also have another word for the social part, and that's called psychological safety. And I'm just going to try and show you some statistics here, and that's where I try to combine the conceptual thing with the data. Now, the dots you see up here represent a vessel at a given time, where the crew have given us data back on how well they feel, their social reflectivity, how well they feel about their colleagues, and to what degree they review their task. And if you look at every single dot there and you look at the line, it's quite easy to see that if social reflectivity or psychological safety goes down, in other words, the feeling of being appreciated or being able to speak up and say things, if that goes down, we stop discussing our job. And that in principle is not a new thing, but the new thing is that if we can visualize it and start showing that one of the dots up here might actually have an issue. If we can start showing that to the vessels, but also the crew, but also ashore, to say, if we can get these dots up there, we can start talking about it. We can actually start addressing it to say, if we don't discuss our job, like the surgeons, if they don't discuss how they do things, we will make more mistakes. So we have a number that we can look at. This is really a KPI to focus on to say, is there something we need to do here? And let me show you another thing. So this represents 340 vessels, but let's look at it from a company perspective. This is a company I've been working with for 5 years, where they've been focusing on psychological safety, where they've been focusing on reviews of tasks, where they've been focusing on trying to drive that agenda. They have 80 vessels, and it's quite clear to see what happens here, that they are at the top level, and they have this feeling of being able to say things, and they review. And if you look at the traditional KPIs, the statistics, they are also looking really good because they're just going in the right direction. Now, if I take this company here, which is a new company, just started, you will see a big difference here. You will see that there's a need to actually work towards this idea of developing this ability to understand how we create psychological safety and how we have more performance reviews, because otherwise we're going to end up like the surgeons again. And finally, if you look here, this is a traditional ship management, crew management setup. And if you look at it there, it's also quite clear to see that the degree of reviews goes down. And one of the reasons is the retention rate here is lower. So there's some things to learn from this if we want to try and discuss what to keep an eye on when we're talking human performance. Now, my time, I have 2 minutes left, so. Okay, now, just one more thing before I leave you here. One thing we can see also is that when we help seafarers, officers, direct their attention towards different performance areas, when we help them do reviews, when we help them understand what they need to discuss, we also help them become aware of their performance, simply because we direct their attention towards the things we want them to focus on. What this says, now I won't go into the statistical detail, but in a nutshell, what this says is that when senior officers realize there's something that is not perfect seen from a human performance or performance perspective, safety perspective in general, the ratings and the juniors will in the following period, and that's why we follow them over time, in the following period we can actually see that they say improvements have been seen. So back to the matrix, when you review and people become aware of you have an issue, juniors and ratings feel an improvement in the following period. And basically that's what we want to achieve. We want to have this continuous review process. Because if we don't do it, we will end up like the surgeons, and we are ending up like the surgeons, because this industry is not doing enough performance reviews, in my perspective, especially when we're talking at a team perspective. So, if we are to do anything about human performance, we need to focus on reviews, more of them, how we do our debriefings, the reviews of safety critical operations, and if we are to do valuable reviews, we need to focus on psychological safety, and that's also where the leaders come into the picture, and that is a completely different story. And now I have to stop because it's 0. Thank you.
Thank you, Erik.